January 28th, 2020. Members of the committee present are Councilors Di Natale, Councilors Kuchar, Councilors Schultz, Zarella, and myself, Councilor Walsh. There is one item on the agenda tonight that we'll address. Fitchburg Access Television is not actually conducting audio and video recording, but if anyone else in the audience is, they are conducting. I stand corrected. Please be advised that Fitchburg Access Television is conducting audio and video recording at this meeting for public broadcast. I ask anyone else in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves for the record now by standing and stating their name and address.
Dan Squalia, 225 Scott Road.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. The item on the agenda tonight is petition 06718, Councilor Michael Kushmerek, to require all short-term rental units to register and have a regular inspection as outlined in the attached document. This petition was filed, as you can tell by the number, in 2018. The Legislative Affairs Committee met in January of 2019 and discussed this petition. At that point in time, the committee decided to hold this petition in committee and ask for input from the departments in the city who would have a say in such inspections. And those departments included the building department, the fire department, the Board of Health, housing. The city solicitor's office was represented at those meetings, as was the planning board. I attended them as well. There were several meetings over the period of approximately 1 year. Commissioner Barbadoro of the building department is here this evening, and I'm going to ask, I think I'll let Commissioner Barbadoro, actually, why don't we have a public comment period right now. If there's anyone here who would like to address the item on the agenda, please come up to the table and identify yourself by name and address.
Yep. Josiah Richards. I'm at 199 Fisher Road. I'll just say a couple brief comments. I think most of you know by now that I am one of the Airbnb hosts here in Fitchburg. I first want to thank the committee as well as department heads across the city, and I know that Lieutenant Jordan's not here, and he's done a ton of work to look into this, not only the state legislation, but also building codes, fire codes, and all that. So I appreciate all the work everyone's put into it. I do hope that it is the fairest and most lenient policies that the city can adopt. What I would say, actually, on a little lighter note, after this last Finance Committee meeting talking about a lot of money we're spending, this is an area in which you might be able to collect a little taxes, but not that much. So I just asked the committee and the city council to consider, whenever possible, for private homeowners who have an owner-occupied property in which they do short-term rentals of 2, maybe 3 bedrooms, to be as lenient as possible. I feel like we can always make the policy stricter, but it's harder to go back and make it more lenient. But that would be my comment. Again, I thank everybody for their time, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. The meetings that were conducted over the period of the last year resulted in an application for short-term rentals and lodging houses. It's a draft application, and I would ask Commissioner Barbadoro at this time if he would come up and discuss that.
Hello.
Hello.
So when we were tasked with this in the first place, what we did was we sat down and consolidated all of the rules relating to renting of rooms in small quantities in dwellings that exist already on the books. And what we decided was that we could benefit short-term renters by collecting them all and creating a centralized application where we could gather the information so we could tell them what the current laws require, as well as some of the local adopted codes that the city has adopted. And we also had a discussion about, is there anything needed for the, a small homeowner-operated Airbnb-style short-term rental where 1 or 2 rooms would be rented. And it was decided amongst many department heads and board members that participated that perhaps it would be best if we could inspect once a year these buildings to make sure that the smoke detectors are working and the exits, people could get out and be safe. And it was also thought that if you were renting to 1 or 2 people, that we would not charge a fee for this service because that it is such a small operation that a $75 annual fee might be burdensome. So with that in mind, the rules that we've collected here are all existing rules that are currently on the books and required by the building code, the fire code, our zoning, our license commission rules, Board of Health regulations, except that if you are a homeowner renting 1 to 4 rooms and you are owner occupied, you would now need to annually have your exits checked and your smoke detectors checked for functionality. And that is the only upgrade that in any of the rules that are in this. So were this not to be adopted and you were to rent but not owner occupy, you would need an annual inspection. And if you were to, you would need to, if you were renting to 4 persons, you would need to have a lodging house license anyways. You would need to have Board of Health lodging license and so on.
Questions from the committee? Did you? I would ask, I know that Mr. Richards had sent a letter with several questions, and I'd ask if you could maybe address a few of the major points that he had raised in his letter. That letter will be part of the record.
Yeah, I don't have the copy of the letter on me, but I did respond by email to the questions, and I numbered them. So unfortunately, the questions were numbered, and I answered the questions numerically. But the first question was regarding how, oh, thank you, sir. The first question is, how will short-term rentals be monitored, including unregistered properties? Will all forms of short-term rental marketing be monitored, such as Airbnb, Booking.com, Couchsurfing, Craigslist, Expedia, HomeAway, landlord associations, newspaper ads, realtor groups, VRBO, which I'm not sure what that means, et cetera. And I think the answer is we would provide the same monitoring that we would do for any housing that occurs in the city. So we use all of the means and methods to determine whether or not someone is compliant with their housing. We use all the same methods, which is mostly it's complaint driven, or if we already have known that there is a an operation in effect. And it's not to be punitive, it's to simply make sure that if you're providing a service to people, they have a reasonable expectation that minimum safety equipment will be functioning in the building. So that's the answer to the first one. The next question that was raised was, how will the ADA requirements affect single-family residential homes? What's the threshold for a room unit and or occupancy count that triggers ADA compliance? And the ADA and the AAB are, so the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. The AAB is the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board rules and regulations. And we don't enforce the ADA, courts do, but we do enforce through the building code. We enforce the Architectural Access Board regulations. They're actually the same when it comes to small operating rooms for rent. And that is, if you are a renter, you're a landlord, you live in the house, and you're going to rent out up to 5 rooms, that you are exempt from ADA requirements. If you are to rent and you are not a homeowner-occupied building, then that building may have gone from a private residence to a public facility at that point, and you would need to make ramps and accessible bathrooms. And if you started spending money on renovations, whatever renovations you did would need to comply. And if you spend over $100,000, then an accessible route needs to be created, an accessible entrance, and so on. So, but short-term rental operators who are owner-occupied would not be subject to it. Also, people who would do short-term rentals of their whole house to a family would also not be subject to the regulations. So, but all others potentially could be. So that's the answer to number 2. Number 3, if valid off-street is required, I'm assuming parking, how will homes without driveways be able to participate in the home sharing economy, or will those homeowners be prohibited from offering short-term rental accommodations? So we're not making any new rules here. The rules for parking, the rules for a accessory lodging at your house, if your house has no parking now and you want to do accessory lodging there, then no parking requirements are mentioned in the zoning code. But if you were to do other than that, or if you wanted to get a special permit to rent to more than 2 persons, then that board could very well consider your parking needs. And if you were imposing on the neighbors, they could say no. So, but other than that, so once you start scaling up, then it's going to become an issue. If you're starting off with 1 or 2 renters, it's not an issue. Let's see. Okay, lodging versus short-term. Current zoning regulations prohibit B&B establishments from offering long-term stays, such as lodging. However, some guests need a place to stay longer than 31 days, which effectively makes them a tenant or lodger. Many of these guests are here on business and want to avoid the high cost of a hotel and appreciate the creature comforts of a home. Can registered short-term rentals offer both short-term and long-term stays in the same unit? And this one, I think, from the way the zoning appears to be in my understanding of it, is that if you were to create a bed and breakfast, well, the definition of a bed and breakfast says that it needs to be short-term only. Bed and breakfasts are allowed by special permit with the Board of Appeals in every district in the city. So you're allowed to create one, but you are not allowed to have people stay for longer than what would be defined as short-term in the bylaw. And I don't think it specifically mentions a number, so I'm just, at this point, I'm sort of applying the building code's definition of what transient is, which is less than 30 days. So I would say that if you are trying to apply for a special permit as that in the district which allows a bed and breakfast, which is anyone, you can't do long-term rental there. If you want to do that, you would probably need a special permit as a primary use lodging house, which is allowed only in 2 districts in the city, which is a residential C and in the FSC. In which case, since the lodging house doesn't define itself by the duration of the stay, it could be either short-term or long-term. And as you can all see, it's going to be a complicated mess to try and work through, and that's why I'd like to just try and consolidate it all onto one application so that I can, if you have those questions, we can, on a case-by-case basis, go through it. So, let's see. Okay. Number 5, in short-term, in terms of number of occupants, let's say a homeowner, i.e. a couple, has a 5-bedroom, single-family home. 1 bedroom is for themselves, 3 for short-term rentals, and a 5th is rented to a long-term tenant. a tenant at will. One of the short-term rental units only sleeps up to 2 guests, and the other sleeps only 1 guest each. The present capacity, at most, 5 overnight occupants unrelated to the owner. Is this scenario prohibited under the new regulations? So the new regulations prohibit nothing and approve nothing. The new regulations only say if you do this and you are doing it for 1 or 2, or let's say 1 to 4, and you're owner occupied, you would need an annual inspection for safety's sake.
Wonderful people or rooms?
So the current zoning code says that if you have a accessory lodging house, say you live there, you can by right rent to 1 to 2 persons, and by special permit rent to more. And if you are a lodging house, you can rent to up to 6 persons. That's already in the code. It's not anything new that we're talking about here. We're basically just applying it to a new concept of marketing, so, which is the short-term rental market. So we're really just taking the new idea of getting your people online to come for limited periods of time and just applying our existing rules to it. So,
I'll interrupt you for just a second. If people in the audience have
Thanks.
questions, I would prefer that you address them to the chair, and the chair will decide whether to refer them to Mr. Barbadoro at this time. Thank you. Please continue.
okay. Yeah, so if you were trying to rent to 5, you could do that in the districts that are allowed to do that, which is residential C and the FSC. If you want to rent to 5 or more short-term, you could get a license by special permit in any district as a bed and breakfast, but then you would not be able to rent long-term. So that would create a conflict with one of the criteria that was asked about, which was basically, can I have a few short-term renters, 1 long-term renter, and live there myself? The answer is yes, but only in 2 districts, RC and FSC. Other than that, you'd have to get at that capacity, you'd have to get a special permit for a bed and breakfast, and then you couldn't have long-term renters there. And again, this, we could talk about changing rules, but those are the rules that we've got now. So, 6, owner-occupied dwellings with rooms up to 6 guests require sprinkler and alarm upgrades. How will this apply to existing short-term rentals such as bed and breakfast home establishments with 2 to 3 guest rooms and an occupancy for 5 to 6 guests? Well, that's a law, Mass General Law, Chapter 148, 26H, I believe. And if you hit the threshold number, which I believe the fire chief has informed me is 6, then you need to put sprinklers in if you want to rent to that number of unrelated persons. It's a law the city has adopted. I don't know if the city could unadopt it if it chose to, but I would not recommend it because it's important, and it's an important safety feature, particularly for places where rooms are let for short periods of time. And then I also just want to, as a side note, sprinklers can be a frightening word because it has been expensive to install, but there is a system called a 13D system. It needs a water flow for 1 sprinkler head operating in your house. It doesn't need a 6-inch water main and tens of thousands of dollars. It can be installed for $5,000 to $10,000. In fact, you can put a tank and a pump in your basement and pump the water. It's not prohibitively expensive, but it is a cost that needs to be factored. Let's see. And question 7, B&B home establishments are exempt from collecting room occupancy excise tax. How, if at all, will the city make other distinctions between B&B home establishments and similar short-term rentals with fewer than 4 bedrooms that don't serve breakfast? So a bed and breakfast doesn't need, by the building code's definition, doesn't need to actually serve breakfast. But the key for the city's zoning code is that these people be short-term in nature. And you would need a special permit for that. As far as the taxing goes, I think it's this board or some other board that would decide whether or not to adopt the taxing provisions, but what we are discussing has no tax implications whatsoever. There are some fees that need to be paid. Those fees are the existing fees. There are no new fees being created by this document.
Okay. Are there questions from counselors on the committee? Counselor Zarella.
First, one question for Solicitor Terry. Am I correct in assuming that regardless of whether we can revoke our adoption of the sprinkler law or not, am I correct in assuming that it's sort of all or nothing, that we would either adopt it with respect to all uses that meet the criteria or none of them? In other words, if we were to get rid of it, we'd be getting rid of it for lodging houses and other such uses as well, not only for short-term rentals?
Okay, so that's a very complicated question, because we could, quote-unquote, I don't believe, I'm assuming we could unadopt a statute, because we were able to adopt it in the first place, and that's an assumption that I'll make. But even if we to unadopt the statute, the building code requires the installation of sprinkler systems under certain circumstances where it's considered to be a congregate living arrangement, depending upon a change in use. So that wouldn't necessarily just resolve the problem, first of all. And I am not aware that we would be able to go down a menu and pick, this is where we're gonna adopt the sprinkler statute and where we're not gonna adopt the sprinkler statute.
That was my assumption.
The most important thing that we have to think of when we're talking about sprinklers is sprinklers are not being provided for the accommodation of the landlords. And sprinklers are being supplied to the accommodation of overnight guests or tenants and folks who may not be as able to provide or care for themselves, especially in the event of emergency, in a new surrounding, in a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to protect neighbors of buildings where there's large groups of people living, right? So we have, we've all seen on the news fires that come up in a tall three-family, and it's a windy evening in the middle of the winter, and the fire spreads through the neighborhood. And sprinklers are also intended to protect our first responders, people who are immediately showing up to the scene and are running into people's homes to protect life and property. I don't think it would be a wise move in the right direction for us to even consider the unadopting the sprinkler code. And even if we were able to, we can't unadopt the building code that Commissioner applies from time to time. And so you would find yourself still requiring sprinklers in certain circumstances.
Okay, I entirely concur. I just wanted to get clarity on that. Commissioner, could you speak briefly to what you touched on about rentals by right in a single-family home? It hasn't come up much on the zoning board, so I'm not as familiar with that, but...
Yeah, this is easy. If you look in residential accessory uses, in accessory uses, it tells you how many people you can rent to by right.
Okay.
And then it says if you exceed that number, then you can go to, I believe it's the Board of Appeals, and they can increase that number. But as you know well, all the factors of the neighborhood get considered at that point, and parking could be one of the issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'll wait until any questions have been resolved.
Other questions by counselors on the committee? No. I believe Ms. Squalia had a question.
I just wanted to share that short-term rentals that are registered through Airbnb or some other service per the state legislature are collecting taxes, and those are being sent to the city as of July 1st, 2019. So
I believe it's a
tax
4% tax. I think, Calvin left, but it's 4%, I
Yes.
believe. But, and we have nothing to do with that whatsoever. We're not changing anything. We're not adding an additional tax or anything like that. I want to thank not only Commissioner Barbara Doro, but I wanted to also thank all of the people, like Commissioner Director Curry is here as well. I believe Liz Murphy, Phil Jordan, a number of people from your offices were present at those meetings, and there were a lot of meetings and a lot of drafts of this document. I've met with the city solicitor on a number of occasions to kind of, work on the language and the structure of the document. So I know that his office has been involved in this as well. So I wanted to thank all of those people who came up with this document. So
May I add one thing?
you may.
And anyone who has any questions, come on down. We'll try and figure it out. It's a work in progress, and we're just trying to get it together. And so if you have questions, come down. You'll help us figure out, how things should work.
Okay. And just so that people know, this is actually coming before the License Commission, because this application will go for approval. Once the person, and this is my understanding of how this will work, once somebody applies, then it's approved by all of the different offices, and then that application, once it's been approved by the various departments in the city, will go to the License Commission so that they will get a license to operate. Is that correct?
It's correct for, I don't want to,
For
not 100%
four-
certain, but it's 4 or more. I think.
Okay. And
And
Solicitor
any
Pusateri.
fees for owner-occupied properties for 1 and 2 would have their fees waived.
Yeah, small operations, we just want to make sure the smoke detectors work and you can get out of the building.
And so the only change to our current set of rules, whether they're implemented by federal, state, or our city regulations, is that we'll be waiving fees for small operations in this regard.
And we will be inspecting up to home owner occupied lodging that has up to 4 renters. After that, the building code would require it anyways.
Anyways.
And I would just like to note that in the application, all of the references to each of the legislation or rules or regulations,
Yes.
everything that applies is mentioned in there. So if someone has a question on that, they can always refer to the original document.
But feedback's important, so let me know, what you think.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
So I've been making notes as we've been going through. I do think that whatever we do here, whether here or in the sort of omnibus zoning overhaul that we're doing, we should define expressly what short-term is, and I think up to 31 days is a fair definition, or 30 if that aligns better with the building code.
I believe that short-term rental is outlined in the glossary of terms.
Yes. Wait.
It says, a dwelling or portion thereof used for living and or sleeping that is not a hotel, motel, lodging house, or bed and breakfast establishment where at least one unit or room within a unit or dwelling is rented to an occupant through advanced reservations for not more than 31 consecutive days.
Okay,
And then
so
it continues, an owner, blah, blah, blah.
I'll yield to Commissioner Barbara.
Yes.
That's defined in the statute itself, so if we adopt it, we should probably just pull it right out of the statute.
Okay. The other thought, let me just.
There is a reference to the statute in the second sentence that wasn't read aloud.
Okay, so one thing I do not see in that definition is short-term rental. Our definition of short-term rental does not currently limit it to owner-occupied properties. And just looking at it from a zoning perspective, I think if it is feasible to do so, we probably should, because the idea of, aside from a whole house rental, which is defined there, if you're going on vacation, renting out your house while you're on vacation, that's a whole different thing. But to me, there's a fundamental difference between someone living in a house and renting out rooms in it versus someone renting out rooms in a house that they own as an investment property. The latter, I feel, is it should fall under all the same rules as all our other rental regulations. Yeah, basically, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing both from some of the communications we've received and also just my perspective on this. I feel like if we're going to set up sort of a expedited regimen for short-term rentals, the idea would be to allow homeowners to have some flexibility in how they use their property, not to create a new category of investor property when we already have difficulties with absentee landlords in the city. I feel like we've already had a ton of issues where people have tried to put in lodging houses where they're not supposed to have them, and giving them an additional loophole through which they could squeak in if essentially a lodging house seems to me to be a poor idea. So I'm not going to make it a motion yet because I'd like to hear what the other committee members have to say about it, but I would like to see our short-term rental definition restricted to owner-occupied properties and whole house rentals. And I have some other thoughts, but I'm going to yield the floor for now. I'd like to give other people a chance to.
Speak to that, Commissioner?
Well, that's a choice that the city should make, for sure. But I do want to be clear that the only regulations that are modified here are an increase in inspection regime. And that I would like, even if someone was doing it, in defiance of that, I would still want to get in and make sure the smoke detectors work and the doors, you can get out, and the decks don't collapse and so on.
Can I just weigh in 1
Yes,
second?
please.
I think the concept is that this is an application that what's before the committee tonight and then eventually before city council will be a petition.
Right.
It will not be necessarily the adoption of an ordinance, or will there be the adoption of, if you will, rules or regulations. I know that the License Commission would annually review and revise its own rules and regulations. And if this is a proposed application for the
Right.
License Commission, an approval of this petition would go with this and a recommendation for the adoption of this or this in substantial form for them to use. And therefore, the fine tuning, if you will, of any additional ideas on definitions certainly could be something presented to them in the form of either a written communication from a counselor or in the context of a motion with a vote. But I think the most efficient way would be by either participating in their meeting for the adoption of this or a written communication.
Certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And if you see it differently, I think that's, because this is, I don't think we would tell the License Commission, this is what we want your rules and regulations, unless you adopt an ordinance.
Right, I was under the impression that this was a petition to draft and adopt an ordinance down the road.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that, but that was what I was under the impression of.
I could
but-
look at the petition again, it's been a long time since I.
This is the petition itself.
Okay. It's not the actual.
Yeah.
I had planned to have it in
This
front
is
of me,
the
but my
actual
laptop
petition.
kicked the bucket, so.
Just take that paper.
Yep. Yes,
May I ask a question to Mark again? or-
sure.
Okay. Well, first, I went through the application myself, and I found, for the most part, it's fair, it's reasonable. I know it's really hard to see, but this chart on the back, I was able to zoom in and figure out what it was saying. There is definitely a distinction between a home owner occupied and not homeowner occupied. And from my perspective, I'm only talking from a homeowner occupied perspective. With regards to the number of rooms, the number of occupancy, that's where I'm just like, okay, where's the wiggle room? Which it sounds like Mr. Bevadoro is willing to work with homeowners on a bit of a case-by-case basis, as long as we're not, operating like a 8-room lodging establishment. But my point of clarity, I don't know what residential district I live in, but let's say hypothetically, you lived in one of the districts of which lodging was allowable, with the special zoning or permit. Would it be fair to say that if you erred on the side of maybe longer-term stays, you could still have short-term stays? There's nothing in the like the regs that say somebody has to stay longer than 31 days.
So what, I think the issue is that if you want to rent to 1 or 2 renters in any residential district, short or long-term, you're fine. And you get checked to make sure that your decks and doors are working, your windows work, and your smoke detectors work. When you get into 4, so there's big numbers that make changes to what you have to do, and from 3 is a big one because you need to then get a special permit from the Board of Appeals. 4 is a big one because you now need, and this is a law, the lodging house license law requires a lodging house license, and we've adopted that and created that with our license commission. And then 6 is a big number, because 6 gets you to as high as you can be for a primary use lodging house, and you're also triggering, if you haven't already gotten triggered through the building code, you will definitely be triggered to put in a sprinkler system.
Yeah.
So it's you know, I would like to be happy to meet with you guys, and you know, we can plot a course for what you're planning. And then you can also, I can explain the rules, and you can maybe talk to your counselors about changing any rules that you think are difficult. But I am hoping that they will adopt the ability for us to just check and make sure smoke detectors work, because not everybody is a responsible landlord, and we just want to make sure people are safe.
So what's the, at this point, we're just approving.
Mark, can you clarify for me, just so that I've got a discrete list? The current law that's being applied, federal, state, regulation, state statute, and our city code, our zoning bylaws. The only things that we're going to change in order to facilitate the collective thought of all the department heads that went into this document would be the increased inspections for 1 and 2 renters,
1 to 4 renters.
1 to 4 renters.
Yes, because the building code has a thing in it called a lodging house, and that is if you are a homeowner and you occupy it.
So I gotta keep you, I'm just gonna ask you if I can interrupt you. So if this body was to collectively adopt an amendment to the city code and not the zoning, some rule regarding the inspection of 1 to 4 of owners of property, owner occupied or otherwise, registered 1 or 4 persons, for an inspection, and that there would be a fee for
2 to,
2 to 4.
I mean, excuse me, 3 or 4 would get a fee. 1 to 2 would not get a fee.
Right. Of $75 for the inspection. And that would be the only change into any ordinance or bylaw.
With respect to any fee or with respect to any enforcement?
Yes. And all other rules that we have discussed tonight are either already in place in a state,
Right.
Federal, state, or current zoning bylaw.
Correct. That's my understanding.
And could we put this in the city code under your department code,
Yeah, I hope we could,
as opposed
but,
to into the zoning bylaws?
yeah, I wouldn't put it in the zoning bylaw.
We would put it in the code.
I'd put it in the city code.
Right. I'm hoping that line of questioning has helped clarify that issue.
Yes, it definitely has. several of the thoughts that I have on this will be better suited than to the zoning overhaul that's
Okay.
Okay.
being undertaken at the moment. So
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner,
Thank
for
you.
helping me understand that again.
Did you have a motion, Counselor Zarella?
no, at this time I won't be making a motion to amend or anything. Then.
So what are we,
The motion would be to adopt an ordinance for the city code to include
just,
inspections of persons renting property from 1 to 4 people, and to charge a fee of $75 for people who are renting to 3 to 4
greater
people,
than 3.
greater than 3.
All right.
Okay, sure.
That would be the narrowest change.
In that case, if no one else has any questions or comments, I'll make a no.
Just one second. Did you have one more
Yeah, I
question?
just wanted to add, I guess, just for clarity, Lieutenant Jordan also proposed a potential fee from the fire department. So we're looking at about $125 total.
$50 for
Yeah.
fire department
For
and
annual.
$20 for license commission.
Now, he might mean that for more of a business establishment, but he does have this under the homeowner occupied for up to 4 occupants. But I know this is just his draft, I don't think this is, what's being accepted today,
Right,
but,
we're not approving the application itself,
okay, all right.
okay? That's up to the License Commission to approve whether this is a suggested draft for them,
Yeah,
and we're not voting tonight to approve the application itself.
right, you're just.
We're discussing this to bring all of these issues to light, and then the License Commission, it will be up to them to whether they want to adopt this draft as it is, or as amended, or with amendments. Okay, does that answer your
Well, I'm just saying there
question?
may be other fees that might get passed on to,
But those fees are already in existence, we're not creating those fees. Isn't that correct, Commissioner Barbadoro?
That's my understanding.
Right.
I'll make a motion that we draft an ordinance or have an ordinance drafted pertaining to inspections of short-term rental operations renting to 1 through 4 occupants with a $75 fee for property owners renting to 3 or 4.
Second.
Okay, can you repeat your motion? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get down the specific words of the language of the motion. Draft an ordinance to create inspections for short-term rentals.
To mandate inspections for short-term rentals renting to 1 through 4 occupants with a $75 fee for those renting to 3 or 4 occupants.
Could I just ask one question about the $75 fee
Hold on just a second.
before we second it?
So we have a motion to draft an ordinance to, or to request an ordinance be drafted to mandate inspections of short-term rentals renting to 1 to 4 occupants with a $75 fee for those renting to more than 2 occupants. Is that
Yes.
correct? All right, and I have a motion, and I have a second. Speaking to the motion, Councilor
I was
Schultz.
just wondering how that $75 fee was determined, and who determined that $75 fee?
That predates me. That is in the city code under
that's-
fees for building
It's been there
department.
forever.
It's been, it is one of those things that has been there forever.
Does
It's the way it is, that's
does it
correct.
cover our expenses at this point in time, I guess? is my
Probably
question.
not, but that's what it is.
The building code does, I mean, the building department is pretty good at covering itself with fees, but there are other departments who share in the burden, and so we
Right.
kind of consider our fees to be dispersed amongst other people who aren't collecting at that particular time.
I have a motion and second. Speaking to the motion, Councilor Zarella.
I actually had meant to include that, given that the $75 fee is already statutory and we're simply requiring an inspection. With the consent of the committee, I would like to amend my motion rather than stating that we're establishing a $75 fee for inspections of 3 and 4 occupants, rather that we're requiring an inspection and the fee will be waived for 1 and 2 occupancy establishments.
I second that.
Do I need a,
It's unanimous consent.
and if there's no objection, we'll just go ahead and we'll have, I have a second for the amended motion. Thank you, Councillor Kuchar. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, Commissioner Barbadoro.
Thank you, thank you very much.
Motion to adjourn?
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wow. That was boiled down pretty,
Yeah.
He did. And